source for news and information in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools.
I'm Daisy Pogel, and I teach kindergarten at Matthews Elementary. Use your imagination. I love the little kids, and that is my passion. In my classroom, I always say we're a big kindergarten family. Kindergarten is not what we remember to be. How many sounds? You sound it out. It's rigorous. They leave the year reading, writing, doing addition, subtraction. Can you search for those spelling clues? The first experience that these kiddos come in to my classroom in, let it be the best experience that they've had. I get loose. Hey. I went back to school. I wanted to be impactful. Yeah, right now I'm doing actually my national boards during this weird year because I always feel like you are never too old to learn something. Raise your hand, because I'm going to show you how to do it if you don't have your scissors. I'm Hispanic. As a daughter of immigrants, I feel myself an immigrant. I was born here. I feel it is my job to make sure that these kids don't feel that they can't achieve anything that they don't want to achieve, no matter where they come from, no matter what they speak, no matter what they believe in, no matter how their family looks like, no matter what the color of their skin is. Let me see all your hands that are all messy and beautiful and having fun and full of art. No matter where we are, virtual, in person, we are working very hard to make sure that their kids are ready for what they have to do. Count to 100 every day. This pandemic really cemented in me the fact that I am supposed to be a teacher. And with you guys showing me your artwork, it's been a good day. I see myself being a teacher in kindergarten until I retire. I get down. It's all about your feet. And it is my happy place. It is.
I'm Jennifer Parker, and I teach 5th grade at Polo Ridge Elementary School.
We've been talking about cause and effect, right?
When I was little, I wanted to be a teacher.
Think about the effects here.
I wanted to be the person that can make a difference in somebody else's life. I wanted to be a positive impact on everybody that I came in contact with. And just walking in the first day in the classroom, it was like, this is what I want to do.
Using some of these keywords.
I'm excited to get up each and every day to come to work. I am excited when I'm planning activities for these kids to help them grow.
Maddie.
You know, they were so excited the first day when we were all back in here together, and they're like, we're here, we're back at school, and just seeing the joy on them makes this worthwhile. And one of my kids said to me this year, I really am smart. I love making a difference for these children. I love building the relationships with these children. And I love being able to have the opportunity to show them that they are capable of so much more. We are here for these kids each and every day, and that we're going above and beyond to do everything that we can for each and every child.
So let's think about as if we were doing a cause and effect map.
I take it as not only what I can learn from them, but also what the kids can teach me too. I even have kids from like middle and high schools that send me emails or letters periodically, and they're like, you still are that one teacher who made a difference with me.
For math today?
Yes. Okay.
To me, it doesn't seem like work. It just seems like that's what I'm supposed to be doing. I could not imagine doing anything else for the rest of my life. This is definitely where I want to be.
My name is Damika Kempson, and I teach band here at Sedgefield Middle School. Here we go, from the beginning. Most of our beginners are true beginners. And I want my kids to be confident and to really enjoy the act of playing a musical instrument. It starts with that first note and that excitement. I come from a long line of educators. It's pretty much the only thing that I've known. I just enjoyed school. We're gonna go from the very beginning all the way down to the end. One way that I teach is through demonstrating. So let me play it for them really quick. And so I sit and I play for them constantly. I play piano, I play the clarinet, I play the oboe, the alto saxophone. I also play the euphonium, the tuba. Hardships in learning how to play an instrument or learning a piece of music is temporary. You work your way through it, you pace yourself. No stopping, not even if you mess up. You'll get it. Before you even know it, without even trying, it pops, it happens, it's perfect, it's wonderful.
I got it!
The genuine joy that they bring with them. They make all of this work. When they anticipate coming back, you know you did a good job. Any teacher worth their salt are going to do everything in their power for the best interest of a child.
I am Malachy Brewer, and I teach social studies at Ridge Road Middle School.
Question? Who else has questions? Yes.
I've taught high school, I've taught elementary, but a middle school teacher, that's some extra jewels in the crown. You really and truly could see the light bulb go off. Like when they get it, they get it.
That part is true.
Teaching, period, is a calling. I was essentially running from my calling, did some exploring, and realized, this is it. I couldn't run anymore. Like I tell my kids every day, go be great. We really do want them to be great. We make adjustments on the minute, every day, all day long.
You have to answer them all, darling.
I don't think it matters that it's a black or a brown child. I want them to do well. I want them to understand that you can do well. I tell them to go be great because I mean it.
Show me. Are we good with it?
Inside of the classroom, we have to show them why this matters to them.
Yes. I love it.
Then next year, they send you an email going, you know, it was your class. That was the reason that I came every day.
I am going to assign everybody a question.
Because you made me do it. You didn't put me out. That desire to learn, that means more to me than if you got a 100, because you cared enough to want to participate.
Miss Mack, you're number 5.
Okay, let me find out you're trying to be a scholar today. You did fabulous today. No, I smiled, you smiled, we all did great together. Then they'll come back tomorrow and try even harder. I ended up here because it's what God called me to do.
Hi, I'm Keenan Kerr, and I teach 7th and 8th grade English Language Arts at Whitewater Middle School.
All right, we're back.
I became interested in teaching because of the example of my teachers. I was a part of the North Carolina Teaching Fellows program that really helped to establish who I am as a teacher today. Really what I do in teaching students who are fully remote, who are learning from home, is not much different than what I would be doing in the classroom.
Circle words that are unfamiliar to you.
It's just the mode of delivery, the mode of instruction is different. And so you have to be creative in that sense and adaptive and flexible. That's been the word of the year, I think, flexible.
What word do you see in there that you recognize?
Well, I love to read and I love to write.
All right, we're gonna read this a second time.
In my classes, what I seek to communicate, reading is really a way to experience the world, and writing is really a tool to communicate our thoughts and a way to advocate for ourselves and for others.
You're gonna decide, is this constitutional or not?
And to use those tools as ways to transform society, which is ultimately my goal as a teacher.
That's a judgment that you're gonna have to make.
Yeah, it's a big task. It's a weighty one. And I also want to be a part of advocating to make teaching a more desirable profession, because it does concern me the amount of teachers that are leaving the classroom for various reasons. And this is a noble profession. It's an extremely gratifying one, and I am lucky every day I'm in the classroom, and I hope to stay there for a very long time.
See you tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.
Wants to hear a story?
Once upon a time, there were 3 billy goats.
The tiniest billy goat.
Not tripping over my bridge. It is I, the biggest billy goat rock.
And the billy goat was so heavy that the bridge creaked and
There's a bridge they have to cross. And
great, ugly as eyes as big as saucers, nose as long as a fire poker.
And he had the biggest.
The road, the troll, its only eye.
Trick, trap, treat.
continued up to the hillside.
Why, thank you.
My name is Paris Spate, and I teach problem-based learning at Windsor Park Elementary School.
I need your help. Here we go.
The whole purpose of problem-based learning is to learn about ourselves, learn about the world,
I need to know how much sugar I need to go buy from the store.
tapping into what they love so that they can make change in the best way.
+2 + 2 + 2.
And to get people to expand their mind on what educating really is, because it goes so far beyond.
Head, thorax, abdomen.
So I went to 12 schools, which is pretty crazy. I went to 6 high schools, and so I got to see the inequities between each school. I knew from that moment that I wanted to work in a Title I school. So my grandparents are full Vietnamese. Most of our students speak English as a second language, and it's been really cool to kind of use my experience that I have with my grandparents to say that language is no barrier to showing love.
Turn on your math minds.
I think a lot of these kids, it's learning, first of all, who they are, and then learning how to embrace who other people are.
Looks like we're gonna be practicing our counting by twos.
As you sit there with them and say, hey, just pick up the pencil and start to draw, you see that they can get it, and you're like, you guys are so capable. So I think when you hit the social emotional needs of our learners, you'll see the academic needs go up.
This is like 6th grade math, but I believe you can do it.
We have to get those basic needs met first. So I think really it's just that, like, we have to believe in these children. I always say that, like, I'm not going to change the world, but I truly believe that I will be impacting the students that do. And so it is my job to just work tirelessly for them, and it's a privilege to serve them. It's everything.
I'm Daisy Pogel, and I teach kindergarten at Matthews Elementary. Use your imagination. I love the little kids, and that is my passion. In my classroom, I always say we're a big kindergarten family. Kindergarten is not what we remember to be. How many sounds? You sound it out. It's rigorous. They leave the year reading, writing, doing addition, subtraction. Can you search for those spelling clues? I'm the first experience that these kiddos come in to my classroom in. Let it be the best experience that they've had. I get loose. Hey. I went back to school. I wanted to be impactful. Yeah, right now I'm doing actually my national boards during this weird year because I always feel like you are never too old to learn something. Raise your hand, because I'm going to show you how to do it if you don't have your scissors. I'm Hispanic. As a daughter of immigrants, I feel myself an immigrant. I was born here. I feel it is my job to make sure that these kids don't feel that they can't achieve anything that they don't want to achieve, no matter where they come from, no matter what they speak, no matter what they believe in, no matter how their family looks like, no matter what the color of their skin is. Let me see all your hands that are all messy and beautiful and having fun and full of art. No matter where we are, virtual, in person, we are working very hard to make sure that their kids are ready for what they have to do. Count to 100 every day. This pandemic really cemented in me the fact that I am supposed to be a teacher. And with you guys showing me your artwork, it's been a good day. I see myself being a teacher in kindergarten until I retire. I get down. It's all about your feet. And it is my happy place. It is.
Jennifer Parker, and I teach 5th grade at Polo Ridge Elementary School.
We've been talking about cause and effect, right?
When I was little, I wanted to be a teacher.
Think about the effects here.
I wanted to be the person that can make a difference in somebody else's life. I wanted to be a positive impact on everybody that I came in contact with. And just walking in the first day in the classroom, it was like, this is what I want to do.
Using some of these keywords.
I'm excited to get up each and every day to come to work. I am excited when I'm planning activities for these kids to help them grow.
Maddie.
You know, they were so excited the first day when we were all back in here together, and they're like, we're here, we're back at school, and just seeing the joy on them makes this worthwhile. And one of my kids said to me this year, I really am smart. I love making a difference for these children. I love building the relationships with these children. And I love being able to have the opportunity to show them that they are capable of so much more. We are here for these kids each and every day, and that we're going above and beyond to do everything that we can for each and every child.
So let's think about as if we were doing a cause and effect map.
I take it as not only what I can learn from them, but also what the kids can teach me too. I even have kids from like middle and high schools that send me emails or letters periodically, and they're like, you still are that one teacher who made a difference with me.
For math today? Yes. Okay.
To me, it doesn't seem like work. It just seems like that's what I'm supposed to be doing. I could not imagine doing anything else for the rest of my life. This is definitely where I want to be.
My name is Damika Kempson, and I teach band here at Sedgefield Middle School. Here we go, from the beginning. Most of our beginners are true beginners. And I want my kids to be confident and to really enjoy the act of playing a musical instrument. It starts with that first note and that excitement. I come from a long line of educators. It's pretty much the only thing that I've known. I just enjoyed school. We're gonna go from the very beginning all the way down to the end. One way that I teach is through demonstrating. So let me play it for them really quick. And so I sit and I play for them constantly. I play piano, I play the clarinet, I play the oboe, the alto saxophone. I also play the euphonium, the tuba. Hardships in learning how to play an instrument or learning a piece of music is temporary. You work your way through it, you pace yourself. No stopping, not even if you mess up. You'll get it. Before you even know it, without even trying, it pops, it happens, it's perfect, it's wonderful.
I got it!
The genuine joy that they bring with them, they make all of this work. When they anticipate coming back, you know you did a good job. Any teacher worth their salt are going to do everything in their power for the best interest of a child.
I am Malachy Brewer, and I teach social studies at Ridge Road Middle School.
Question? Who else has questions? Yes.
I've taught high school, I've taught elementary, but a middle school teacher, that's some extra jewels in the crown. You really and truly could see the light bulb go off. Like when they get it, they get it.
That part is true.
Teaching, period, is a calling. I was essentially running from my calling, did some exploring, and realized, this is it. I couldn't run anymore. Like I tell my kids every day, go be great. We really do want them to be great. We make adjustments on the minute, every day, all day long.
You have to answer them all, darling.
I don't think it matters that it's a black or a brown child. I want them to do well. I want them to understand that you can do well. I tell them to go be great because I mean it.
Show me. Are we good with it?
Inside of the classroom, we have to show them why this matters to them.
Yes. I love it.
Then next year, they send you an email going, it was your class. That was the reason that I came every day.
I am going to assign everybody a question.
Because you made me do it. You didn't put me out. That desire to learn, that means more to me than if you got a 100, because you cared enough to want to participate.
Miss Mack, you're number 5.
Okay, let me find out you're trying to be a scholar today. You did fabulous today. No, I smiled, you smiled, we all did great together. Then they'll come back tomorrow and try even harder. I ended up here because it's what God called me to do.
Hi, I'm Keenan Kerr, and I teach 7th and 8th grade English Language Arts at Whitewater Middle School.
All right, we're back.
I became interested in teaching because of the example of my teachers. I was a part of the North Carolina Teaching Fellows program that really helped to establish who I am as a teacher today. Really what I do in teaching students who are fully remote, who are learning from home, is not much different than what I would be doing in the classroom.
Circle words that are unfamiliar to you.
It's just the mode of delivery, the mode of instruction is different. And so you have to be creative in that sense and adaptive and flexible. That's been the word of the year, I think, flexible.
What word do you see in there that you recognize?
Well, I love to read and I love to write.
All right, we're going to read this a second time.
In my classes, what I seek to communicate, reading is really a way to experience the world, and writing is really a tool to communicate our thoughts and a way to advocate for ourselves and for others.
You're going to decide, is this constitutional or not?
And to use those tools as ways to transform society, which is ultimately my goal as a teacher.
That's a judgment that you're going to have to make.
Yeah, it's a big task. It's a weighty one. And I also want to be a part of advocating to make teaching a more desirable profession, because it does concern me the amount of teachers that are leaving the classroom for various reasons. And this is a noble profession. It's an extremely gratifying one, and I am lucky every day I'm in the classroom, and I hope to stay there for a very long time.
See you tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.
Good evening. I now call the April 27th, 2021 meeting of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education to order. I will now entertain a motion to adopt the agenda. Second. Motion from Ms. Sawyer, second from Ms. Byers-Bailey. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. Any opposed? Okay, I believe that passes 8-0. Okay. So the next item is our consent agenda. Is there a motion that the board approve the consent agenda items?
So moved.
Motion from Ms. Sawyer. Do I have a second? Second from Ms. Shipp. Before we move to a vote, does any board member wish to pull any part of this item for individual consideration? Hearing none. We'll move to the vote. All those in favor, please raise your hands. Any opposed? All right, Madam Clerk, that passes by unanimous vote of 9-0. Okay, colleagues, we have, oh, that's right. Do you have some personnel items to introduce?
Yes, Madam Chair. Thank you. Good evening, board members. I am excited to present two personnel matters. The first being Miss Brenda Mills, who just became, through the board action, the next principal at Parkside Elementary School. Currently, Miss Mills is the assistant principal at J.W. Greer Academy, where she has served since 2020. Prior to that, she was an assistant principal at Parkside Elementary. So in many ways, this is a homecoming of sorts for Miss Mills, and I know she's excited about rejoining the Parkside family. I will tell you that what came across very clearly to me in her interview is that she believes in inspiring, investing in, and empowering our teachers, our students, and their families to help them reach their full potential. So I am excited to announce Miss Mills as the next principal at Parkside Elementary School. And I know that Miss Mills has joined us this evening, and I would invite her to provide any brief remarks that she may want to share with us.
So I want to first thank you, Mr. Winston, and all the board members for the opportunity to become a principal here in CMS. I want to thank the Northeast Learning Community, Mr. Wall, Marcy Beard, Rebecca Lennon for all your support. For the past year, I have been an AP at J.W. Greer, and I want to thank Bridget Wilson and the Greer staff and families for their warm welcome and for all of their efforts to make my first year and this year for our students a success. To my Parkside family, to Diana Newman, who has served as my mentor and my partner for many years. Thank you for all of your support and your help. And to my Parkside families and staff and students, I look forward to joining you again soon as your principal. Thank you.
Thank you, Principal Mills. I can now refer to you as. The second and the last appointment involves Dr. Kevin Woods. Dr. Woods will become the new principal at Randolph IB Middle School. Currently, Dr. Woods is the principal at Crown Point Elementary School, where he has served since 2018, and prior to that, he served as the principal at Moorhead STEM Academy and also Windsor Park Elementary School. One point of distinction that I want to share about Dr. Woods is that he has successfully led all of his schools to meet or exceed growth yearly on their end of grade testing. And I know he also led Moorhead STEM Academy to be recognized as a magnet school of distinction for 4 consecutive years. Dr. Woods, excited to announce you as the new principal of Randolph IB, and would also invite you to provide any brief remarks that you may have.
Thank you, Superintendent Winston. I'd like to begin by thanking you, Superintendent Winston, along with Dr. Curtis Carroll, who I had the distinct privilege of serving under for many years, and our illustrious school board for this wonderful opportunity. I'm also would like to thank Dr. Tangela Williams and Executive Director Hayes, the entire Southeast Learning Community Office, for their continued support as the principal of Crown Point Elementary. Superintendent Winston, you have some very dedicated teachers and a very dedicated community at Crown Point. I'd like to thank the Crown Point community for their continued support. I am extremely excited to become the newest rater, and I look forward to leading and collaborating with the staff and community at Randolph Middle School.
Thank you, Dr. Woods. And Madam Chair, that concludes my report.
All right. Well, we will dive right into our action item then. Colleagues, we have one action item tonight, and that is to consider approving the proposed budget for fiscal year 2021-2022. I turn it back to you, Mr. Superintendent, to introduce this item and make a recommendation.
Thank you, Madam Chair and board members. I am excited that we arrive at tonight's meeting after several public engagement sessions that we've conducted this year virtually due to the ongoing impact of the COVID pandemic. And you'll see a number of opportunities that we've had for members of our community to have an opportunity to weigh in on the proposed budget. As you will see on the next slide, we have heard from members of our community. And it is very clear that as we hopefully are rounding the corner with the COVID pandemic and beginning to return to a sense of normalcy with more in-person instruction, social and emotional health and well-being of our students is top of mind for many in our community. And so our budget request definitely makes that a priority, as you will see and hear momentarily. And so one of the things we know is that our students' social and emotional health has been impacted, and we need to invest in resources to help our students process the very real impacts of the pandemic. And I want to emphasize a key element of our budget process. Throughout the development of our budget, we have relied on input from our focus area teams in the district that they've made sure that our budget recommendations are aligned to our strategic areas that we believe will lead to improvement in all outcomes for all of our students. And so as we transition to the next slide, we're not going to belabor this point, but we know that the pandemic has impacted virtually every aspect of our lives. And the budget that we have discussed to this point and that we present tonight for your consideration has been created with the impact of the pandemic both front and center. And so we knew that gaps existed prior to the pandemic, and those gaps have only deepened. And much of what we discuss and how we prioritize funding is a direct result of how our schools have felt the impact of COVID-19. And so as we look at the alignment with our strategic plan, and as we have talked about before, our budget ask is aligned with our strategic plan. Every element and all priorities taken that we've taken into consideration, one or more of the focus areas that you see on the right-hand slide. And those were developed to help keep us moving toward equity of opportunity and ultimately improved outcomes for all of the students that we serve, that we're privileged to serve in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. We've talked about the priorities on the next slide, so I won't belabor that as well. And so when we think about where are we now, this past year and a half, and I think you all will agree, have been amongst the most challenging of our lifetime in terms of education. And we have focused on protecting the safety and the health of both our students and our staff members. And I believe that we can claim success in those areas, but we know that between difficulties for some students with remote learning and the previously mentioned social and emotional toll of the pandemic, gaps that existed before COVID have gotten deeper. And we know that at least 50,000 of our students are considered at risk of failing at least one course. And so we believe we must act now to help our students complete any unfinished learning. And we have almost 30,000 students that have registered for our Camp CMS Summer Enrichment Experience. And we aim to help our students make up ground prior to the start of the next school year. And so here, as it relates to the overview of our district finances, we know our challenges are significant. But I wholeheartedly believe that our team is up for the challenge. And we have received, as we've talked about, a significant infusion of temporary funding from federal sources. That funding has one purpose, and that is to help narrow the gaps that have been widened by the pandemic. And I'll say it now, and it may bear repeating several times, that while COVID-related funding is significant, it is significant because the immediate need is also significant. And I will also emphasize that temporary COVID funding carries with it restrictions on how and when it must be used. And we must apply COVID funding, for example, to challenges caused by or related to the pandemic. The district had needs that existed before COVID, and we will continue to have needs that exist after the pandemic, and hopefully becomes a distant memory. And I know we all cannot wait for that day to come. Cannot come soon enough. So when we look at the first part of the COVID funding, came in via the coronavirus response and relief supplemental appropriations. We refer to that as CRRSA, the acronym CRRSA. But much of that has been allocated to help the district address technology and academic support, as well as apply towards our Camp CMS summer program. Now, we must be clear that we have not yet received all of the COVID-related funding from the federal government that we expect to receive. Now, when we do, we want to assure members of our community that we will seek input as to how we prioritize usage of that funding. Within the coming weeks, we will roll out an engagement strategy effort using a tool called Thought Exchange. We will seek input from the community members, and we will use that as we determine how to invest the temporary funds we have received to battle the pandemic-caused challenges. And so I know that we have spent a significant amount of time on those funds, and we're certainly happy to answer any questions later on about that. So What I'd like to do now is transition to our local funding request for 2021, 2022, and just spend a few moments detailing our request to Mecklenburg County. And I'll restate that while we have received or will soon receive COVID-related funding to support our efforts to close gaps, we must continue to fund our ongoing needs here in the district. And so, we know that research shows that the single most important factor that drives academic success for students is great teaching. And so we must fund our teachers and our staff. They've been asked to do more this year than ever before, including hybrid teaching with students present, virtually and in person in many cases, transportation and nutrition with new safety protocols. The list of never before challenges goes on and on. Related to our facilities are our biggest local request because facilities are a significant portion of our funding needs and have such long-term impact. Our students and staff, they need safe places to learn and work. Preventive maintenance is necessary to keep our facilities operating as they must. And you'll see that ask is $5 million for preventive maintenance. In addition, we have several new facilities opening and coming online in 21-22 school year. The square footage is necessary to relieve overcrowding at some schools, but when we add facility space, we increase the overall cost to operate. And so that ask here is $2.1 million. And then we will continue our effort to modernize operations in areas such as finance and human resources. Investments in this area will lead to more efficient operations and long-term savings due to those efficiencies. And you see the total ask on this page is about $1.8 million. We ask our funding partners to help us in the key area of student wellness and academic support. You'll see 2 question marks in both charts on this particular slide. And while we know that the pandemic has had a tremendous impact in such areas as increased suicide risk and additional referrals to community support services, it is difficult to assess those areas during a year when assessments have not happened as they would in normal times. And so the need is great, and we must invest in assessing and addressing social and mental health needs so we can provide the necessary support for our students. And the ask here is $3.9 million. One area where we want to see improvement is in our ability to provide support for students in the area of behavior and discipline. And this is a significant need from an equity standpoint, and we believe investing in behavior and support centers will help us address the inequities that exist. And the ask in this area is approximately $200,000. Now, we also expect growth in the pass-through funding for charter schools as this trend continues here, not only in this state, but throughout the country. And that would be to the tune of $7.6 million. On this next slide, here we show our proposed county appropriation request along with the request from the previous year. And as we move to our total proposed budget, this is our final slide. And the column, as you'll see on the left-hand side, details our proposed budget without including COVID-related temporary funding. And on the right, we include all funding sources. And as I've said before, we must keep in mind that we do not have funding from the most recent federal legislation, the ARP. Also, we have not proposed allocation for that funding at this time. However, in the spirit of full transparency, we wanted to go ahead and include the estimated amounts that we expect to receive when all COVID-related funding has been received. And so we will engage community members, as I've said previously, and provide updates as we make some key decisions on using that funding to support efforts to educate all students in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. Thank you, board members. Madam Chair, I will hand it back over to you. We're happy to answer any questions.
All right. Board members, before we go to a motion, are there any questions or clarifications or additional information you'd like about what the superintendent just presented? Ms. Shipp?
I saw a mention of school facilities and making sure that those school facilities, Lenore Shipp, making sure that those school facilities will be maintained. What I did not see, and it probably is in there, is specifics about custodians and making sure we increase the number of custodians working in these buildings, especially what we've been through with the pandemic. So, and I know you outlined custodians for new and replacement schools, but the total number of custodians in general and increasing those, I think, is very important. And I just wanted to know where is that also included in a way we can see that in the budget?
So the impact. Mike. Oh, sorry, Ernest Winston. I apologize. In terms of asking for additional custodians, that has not, I mean, outside of the new schools that we're bringing online, Ms. Shipp, we know that we have current vacancies amongst our custodial ranks, and we certainly want to make sure that, you know, they're in high demand, and we want to make sure that we fill those vacancies in the current ranks first. But when we talk about taking care of all of our employees, certainly that does include our custodians, all of our employees, and they're just as valued as any of our employees.
Yeah, I just had that question because I know you did mention new schools and replacement schools, and I know there are a number of custodians listed for that. Just wanted to make sure we're looking at it, especially at a time like this where that's been a major need in the schools.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Marshall?
Thank you. In the public, I think we just need to have constant conversation that the funding that we are receiving from the federal government has a very specific amount of time in which we can use that. And so as you see, there's a note on one of the last slides. It has a lot of numbers on it, but it says that those funds are available for use in the up through the 22 and 2024 school years. So you're going to see a continued usage of those funds. It's a little bit of a different type of thing. We normally present you a budget that we're going to use. We've already figured out how we need to use that yearly. There's some things we don't know yet, but we want to tell you about. But one of the things that I do want to highlight and again ask about is the facilities number, the preventive maintenance. Some of the funds that we are to receive from the federal government, I believe, have the ability to be used for our structural maintenance, and specifically for air handling, for air quality. So I know that we have a number of things that are proposed in that. In the preventive maintenance of $5 million, we had talked about this in the budget workshop, but I just want to emphasize too, and ask too, have we sort of scrubbed that list of proposals to make sure that we can, that none of these things will be covered by that federal money that we're getting in the next couple of years?
Ms. Marshall, Ernest Winston, we have scrubbed that list. Our operations team, which is led by Ms. Shawn, would ask her to come forward, but they've done a really good job of looking at that list and trying to decipher, what can be expended from other sources to help address some of those needs. But I would ask Ms. Turner.
I just think this is important for us to all have a good handle on. Thank you.
Good evening. Yes, we did. We looked at all of the items that were listed in the preventive maintenance, and then we spoke with Katie to ensure that the items that we were considering moving, that they would be eligible expenses under CRISA and or ARP. And so we did. For example, one of the contracts that I'm thinking about is filters, for example. The filters that we replace in all of the facilities, we moved that contract under the CRISA funding for next year. So we did. We did.
Okay. I just think that that's real important, since it's just not carte blanche. We can't just spend it on anything we want. And I think also for folks to understand is that we're going to have to be careful in terms of how we use this for staff, because we don't want to come to the end of this 2024 period, and we want to be able to maintain the things that we do. We certainly want to make up for the time, use our money wisely to help with needs that we have in our staffing. But we have to be aware that at 2024, the pumpkin, the carriage becomes a pumpkin. So we want to avoid that when we can, but be able to maximize our funds. So that will be the tension of this going forward. Those are the questions we'll be asking. So thank you. Thank you.
Ms. Byers-Bailey.
Thank you. Thelma Byers-Bailey here. When you mentioned academic support, you mentioned it under both CRISA for the summer camp, Camp CMS, but then you also mentioned it under student wellness and academic support. And I think the community is probably going to trying to distinguish academic support for county funding versus academic support under CRISA. They would probably need a little bit more help.
So I'm sorry. Yes, thank you for that question, Ms. Byers-Bailey. So the 39, approximately $40 million for, I think you're asking about Camp CMS, the academic supports there?
Yes, that was under CRISA.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then you also mentioned academic support and along with student wellness for $3.9 million, and trying to determine what that form of academic support is, but since CRISA is covering the summer camp.
Yes, and when I talk about, the academic support and the needs that we know have existed before and will continue to exist long after the pandemic hopefully is in our rearview mirror. I think we're talking about the social workers and the school psychologists, that student wellness piece that certainly affects students. We talk about being the whole child, right? And so these are funds that we're asking of the county, funds that we will have, needs that we will have after we've reached our deadline for those federal related fund. And I talked about it's difficult to assess exactly where we are now because we're not in normal times as it relates to the student wellness piece and some of the needs of our students in that particular area.
Okay, so the academic support under that area will be something?
Guidance counselors.
Oh,
Yes, so that's what we're talking about, additional supports in our student services area.
okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So it's not about grades or anything like that?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
But that does impact grades. If we don't meet those needs, they can have a significant impact, direct impact on student outcomes.
Okay. Thank you.
I think that what you're asking for clarification on, I could see a lot of constituents asking that as well. And so over the years, we've been working to increase the numbers of our guidance counselors, social workers, and school psychologists to bring down their caseloads. And this year, we're asking for that again. That they were grossly overtaxed before the pandemic. It will be even more so now. And so that was sort of regardless of federal funding, regardless of COVID, that was a need that continues to be a need. And that's why it's in the county ask.
Well, I understand why it's in the county ask. I just don't know that that the public would necessarily think of that as academic support. I think they think that more of academic is what happens in the classroom, and you see it in the grades, and the emotional, behavioral, that they see for counselors, but they don't look at that as academic. And that's why I was asking the question. Thank you.
Ms. Fowler?
Hi, this is Brianna Fowler speaking, and I have a question about the emerging strategies, specifically the suspension intervention and the suspension prevention / behavior support. And I know that you may not know the answers to these questions now. And if you have the answers, I'll be willing for you to just email me the answers if you cannot answer them to the best of your ability now. But I just had questions about the suspension intervention. So I know that we have Marie G. Davis, which is a short-term suspension site, and people may know it as Turning Point. We have, two different programs, Turning Point and Marie G. Davis. So I know some people have their pros and cons about Turning Point and how it may have our students fall behind academically, and they are put in a negative social emotional environment. So for my question is, what is going to be our plan to have these new schools for, I think it's 3 new intervention programs, 10? So 10 new intervention programs. What are going to be the differences that we're going to have in these schools to not just create another place for our students to go that's in a bad environment?
Well, thank you, Ms. Fowler, for that question. Happened again. Ms. Fowler, thank you for that question. And I'm going to ask Chief of Staff, Ms. LaTarja Henry, who led that focus area team, to elaborate a little bit more on the purpose of the behavior and support centers.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Ms. Fowler, you're correct, but I want you to be clear, there are 2 different programs. So the behavior support centers we're piloting next year, we're proposing to pilot, are in 10 different schools. And it really is an attempt for us to look at ways to correct behavior. So it's actually a proactive strategy for behavior, thinking that if a child or student has an issue or has a circumstance that does not warrant out-of-school suspension, this is an opportunity for them to have time out of the classroom while also learning in another setting in the building where we can talk about behavior. I'm so sorry, I touched something I wasn't supposed to touch on the screen, I apologize. Where we can actually coach behavior, find out what root causes are so that it can be proactive, so that it doesn't escalate to the next step. So to your point, this is not a place where we're going to send kids to try to fix something. This is an opportunity for us to actually bring kids into an environment where we can get to root cause and actually coach on behavior.
And I have two other questions to follow up. About how long will the students be in that program? And my second question, because you could answer it as together, are the students going to be able to go again? So for example, I was suspended one time and I go to your program. Say I am on the brink to getting another suspension. Am I allowed to go to the program again even though I went prior?
So let me clarify something. The behavior support centers are for in-school suspension offenses, okay? So what makes that proactive is that we actually want to get ahead of children losing time from school. So what this does is it takes an offense that would take you out of the classroom, because sometimes you just need space. You just need a time to reset and breathe and have space, but you'll still be in school engaging in work while also being coached around some social and emotional things that could help you not increase recidivism, okay? So we don't want you to do it again. Now the reality is that's different from out of school. The goal is to really look at that core behavior for the in-school suspension referrals and adjust that so that you don't get to come back to in-school suspension or to the next step, out-of-school suspension.
Okay, thank you. And will the, say a student got into this program, will this go on their record?
So this isn't a program, so to speak. Think of it as a strategy, right? Okay. So if in the moment something happens, right, and a child is referred to in-school suspension, this is the response for that. This is the place where children will go for that to happen.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
Any other questions? All right. I will then turn to Board Member Jennifer De La Hara to make this motion.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the superintendent's recommended budget for the 2021-2022 fiscal year as presented. The budget for fiscal year 2021-2022 includes a total operating budget of $1.66 billion. With enterprise funds and other capital items included, our total proposed budget is $1.77 billion, excluding one-time COVID funding. In addition, our total proposed budget includes an anticipated allocation of $446.1 million in COVID-related funding that can be spent over the next 3 years to address the specific impacts of the pandemic.
All right, thank you. Do I have a second for Ms. De La Hara's motion? I've got a second from Dr. Jones. Ms. De La Hara, would you like to speak on your motion?
Just briefly, of course, just to say thank you to the superintendent and to Ms. Sheila Shirley sitting behind me here and her team, who obviously has put a lot of dedicated effort over many months to bring this to us. You know, I think the superintendent did a great job of describing how it was aligned to our strategic plan and all of the community engagement sessions that we held and budget workshops that we held to try to get to this point. So I'm glad we're here, so thank you.
All right. Before we move to a vote, any further discussion from my colleagues? Oh, Mr. Strain.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the things that I have been working through in what is now, I think, our 6th time meeting about the budget, as you know, is as we look at our mission, our vision, our strategic plan, documented goals, targets, we've got a Breaking the Link report, all of these sort of performance metrics that we've said, look, we have to do this if we focus on our students, and we have these areas, these gaps that we're looking to close. We clearly want to invest in closing said gaps. And those gaps were pre-COVID. They were as a result of COVID. They were a result of our decisions and our policies during the pandemic, all of those things. And what I've been looking for is how the investment of the infusion of over $500 million of federal funds is going to both close gaps and advance our strategic goals and targets. And so where are these gaps? Well, you know, how would we enumerate them? Well, they exist, they're documented in our strategic plan, in our goals, and in the Breaking the Link report, and those metrics that we're tracking. And what I've asked a number of times is, given where we are, or the last place that we could reasonably measure, how does this budget move those dials, move our performance metrics? Because we can talk about all sorts of places that it makes sense to invest money. But at the end of the day, how are we moving those dials that we are using to measure the performance of our students and our district? And I have yet to see that. And it's unfortunate because we do have really this amazing opportunity with the infusion of $500 million over a couple of years' time, above and beyond what we normally have, in order to move things like graduation rate, access to rigorous coursework, achievement gaps in college and career readiness, which get further defined, you know, by our low, medium, and high poverty levels and racial and ethnic disparities. Percent of employees reporting highest job sat, percent of employees referring others to work at CMS. These are all metrics we've defined in our strategic plan, to which we're presumably running the district. And so what I've asked is, with this incredible opportunity, and again, I think this is the 6th time we've had budget conversations, I'm still missing how we're moving those dials. All of the conversation we've had has identified, yeah, these are good opportunities. We could put money here, we could put money there. But as a board member, I'm thinking, strategically, are we putting our money in the place that's going to advance our objectives, close our gaps, improve our targets, you know, advance our strategic goals and our targets? And I can't see it. And as such, I'm not going to be able to support the budget because I can't see how it is we're actually making the best use of this amazing opportunity to invest and advance those. And unfortunately, I won't be able to support the budget as a result.
And Mr. Winston, I just want to acknowledge, I also see Ms. Marshall's hand. So do you want to respond first and then she can, or did you want to respond?
I kind of want to respond to that too. I think you raised some great points. I mean, and certainly that's what we want to do. Mr. Strain, again, this is Margaret Marshall speaking, and I want to see all of those things happen. You know, we just found out about, 2 months ago that we were going to get this infusion of capital. And I think that I want to be strategic about it. I want to know some things from the end of this year. I have been working with colleagues across the country to talk about how they're looking at spending this money too. And one of the things that we have said as a group is that we need to know what sort of unfinished learning we have. So I think for me, and I respect that you know, we'd all like to have that crystal ball right now. And I respect that you've come to this conclusion, but I want to say that in my thinking, we need to know where we are, and we're discerning that right now. And so for us to come out with numbers that I think would be premature at this point to say how we're going to solve the problem would be disingenuous, frankly, to our constituents, and would probably not be the right answer. I think this is going to be something we have to weigh a little bit, and that doesn't mean we're not going to come out with something in 6 months. And we're already working towards that. We're working towards our summer work. We have things that our team has been thinking about and has sort of gotten in pretty big buckets, the $141 million, getting ready to work on the remainder of the money. So I don't know that going slow to then go fast is not a bad thing. I want to make sure we do the right thing and that we hear from our stakeholders, because let me tell you, everybody's got an idea on how we're supposed to spend this. Our legislature has some ideas. I hear from community members. I was in meetings last week where I heard folks on Zoom had all kinds of ideas about how we want to do this. So we want to have input from that. So again, I appreciate where, that you've gotten to a point that you personally feel that way, but I feel that we need to spend time and we need to do this the right way to make impact. We're going to return, we're going to recover, and we're going to reinvent. So those are three things that I just can't look at this immediately and tell you how that's all going to happen. Wish I could, but I know that humanly I can't, and these fine people that work in this space spend day and night trying to figure out how to do that, and it's just going to take a little bit more time. So that's my response. Again, I appreciate where you're coming from. I do support the budget.
I see Ms. Shipp. Mr. Winston, I don't know if you have more that you need to add.
Thank you, Ernest Winston. I agree with Ms. Marshall, and I think, one of the data points that we'll use that we don't have yet is the student learning results from this school year, coupled with what we get from our students who participate in our summer learning experience in Camp CMS, and I think we'll be better positioned utilizing those two data points to better help students at the beginning of next school year, following what I hope will be a budget approval. We do have a report that comes directly after this one that speaks to some quarterly data that we want to share that talks about student performance. So I think that will shed some light as well on some of the concerns that you raised, Mr. Strain.
Ms. Shipp?
I think, Superintendent Winston, you've kind of headed in my direction too, because my thing is that we must be intentional and purposeful about our investments and that we see it. And I think kind of what Mr. Strain is saying, we really need to know that this money is making the changes and doing what we needed to do. And so I think you're saying that because we need to see the data and measure that against how we're spending money to make a difference for our students. So it has to be purposeful. Do we hear the investments in people being strong? So we're saying we're doing this for teachers. Are we looking at teacher assistants? What are we doing for our Black and brown students that are failing, that we know they're the main students that need this work greatly? Do we hear this? Do we see this in our spending? And I think that's what, when we talk about community and what they're looking for and what they're hearing, are we really making sure we're intentional? And I think that we are, but we need to be truly showing that in our budget, that we're making a difference for where it's going to make the most difference for our children. That unfinished learning, the ones that we know right now, it's a big gap, and the gap has gotten wider, and the opportunities are wider. And are we really looking at a budget at a time where we have all these pots to make this really happen for our children? Number one, the children first. And I think you're saying that, so I'm hoping that that's where we're going in this budget, but I think it's very important that everybody hears that. We are going to do something different. We are going to make sure we make change happen with all this, with the funds. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shipp.
Dr. Jones?
Thank you. What I hear is that we are planning purposeful interventions. And I think added to that is a kind of, for lack of a better word, a rubric to help us, guide us to whether these interventions are actually addressing what we need. And I pretty much know that staff is fully cognizant of the need to do that, and so I would appreciate it and know that you would you would bring that back to us as a board to let us know the intermittent, intervals, rather, of success on that.
Anybody else? Oh, Ms. Sawyer?
Yeah, I understand the concerns. However, I think we need to kind of separate our county budget request, which is a fairly bare bones request for the essential ongoing needs, from our intervention money. And we have a real opportunity to make changes if, as some of my colleagues have said, go slow to go fast. And if we mine the ideas from the community, from our staff, about what interventions work, where we need to focus, and how we need to support our students, that's where we'll see the impact. And but I think we need to kind of always remember to separate the two pots of money, and the county ask from the intervention money. From the county, we still need to fix roofs and repair asphalt. That's ongoing maintenance kinds of things that we need to turn to our county partners to support.
Anybody else? Ms. Fowler?
Hi, this is Brianna Fowler speaking. I think we're all saying the same things. I think we all want the best for our students. And with that, we all know that the budget is a very pivotal thing that is very important for our students. Our students is why we are here. This is why we do the things that we do. So for us to look at the budget, I agree, it needs to be very strategic. It needs to be slow and not rushed. For example, like Ms. Shipp said, how our Black and brown students are extremely low and failing most of their maths and reading scores, especially their maths. So for us to look at that, we need to say, what is our demographic for teachers? We need to look at our teachers in our elementary schools. For example, most of our teachers are white. Let's look to see and push for the minority teachers to teach our students, to see whether or not that will impact the academics for our students. So I agree, our budget needs to be strategic, but I believe we did put in place the people and the groups and committees to do so. So I think that the budget should be approved, even though I do not get a vote.
All right. Oh, okay, wait, 1 second. I see both. Okay, Dr. Jones, and then.
Please, I heard your statement about more minority teachers. That is a nationwide concern. And so more minority teachers, persons need to be encouraged to go into the profession.
Definitely, and I agree. But I do think that we can have the mindset that more students should be encouraged to have become a minority teacher. I think when you see someone that looks like you be a teacher for you, that will encourage you to then become a teacher. You can have a relationship and you can build from that. For example, my 8th grade math teacher, Mr. O'Neill, he is a Black male, and I know many Black males that are like, wow, Mr. O'Neill is an amazing teacher. I would love to be a part of this program. And things that CMS has implemented, such as the Charlotte Early College for Teaching, that has really gotten students encouraged to become teachers and come back to CMS and be an educator. So I think that we're doing a tremendous job in going forward, but I think that change and improvements can always happen.
Okay, Ms. Cheek.
Just briefly, I'm going to support tonight's budget. If anybody that has looked back over the last 11 and a half years knows that I don't always support the budget. I have probably more lately than in my earlier days. when I was a lot more cantankerous. I know people might find that hard to believe, but I really was a lot more cantankerous back in 09 and through 12 days. What I would say is, I completely understand my colleague, Mr. Strain's concerns about making sure that everything we do with the COVID relief money is directed to things that are interventional and fixing some of the problems that we as a board created by not having school in session and in person. And that's an acknowledgement. That doesn't mean that I think that we should have always been in session. I think that we may, in my opinion, maybe should have gone back sooner than we did. But water under the bridge that now we have to build a big bridge over to fix. So what I would say is I want to make sure that our colleagues on the county commission have a full understanding of what our ask is, that they do, the concerns about making sure that they see the difference between the CRISA and all the other funding that is tied to COVID is different than the money that we're asking them as our normal annual budget request. That's something that's just going to be very crucial that our colleagues really have to understand, and they don't get them mixed up, and it's not supplanting, one is not supplanting the other, and all of those kind of things. So that's my biggest concern going into this budget season, is the separation of all the monies in the eyes of the public and in the eyes of our colleagues on the county commission, and that money from the COVID relief does not supplant money within our budget. That's a huge, I'm just so concerned about that. I wish it was different colors of money, like Monopoly money, like one offset was, like there's green COVID money, and then there's yellow county money. I mean, I just can't emphasize enough that we've got to, from a transparency and communication standpoint as a school board and staff, we have to make that ridiculously clear to every single person in this community, including our elected officials that are going to be deciding on whether they're going to approve this budget request to them. So that would be my big ask, is our communications has got to be spot on with this.
And with that, could we go back to the slide? I don't have the number of the slide, but that shows the county, the difference this year over last year of the county request. Is it 1.2% higher? Is that, am I right about that?
1.8%.
Right, but the county ask part. Is that right, at 1.8%? You have to double check that, okay.
You're never going to get an accounting person to just wing it on numbers. It's just not ever, especially Miss Shirley is never going to wing it on a number. She's going to know for sure.
So I just, as we're confirming that percentage point, so this is just a reminder to ourselves and to our public that we've got our ongoing expenses that we would have had regardless of COVID, just like my household has ongoing expenses regardless of whether a tornado tears my house apart. And so with that, with those ongoing expenses, we have certain things that are, costs go up astronomically, whether we can, we have no control over it, benefits, retirement, those sorts of things, healthcare, health benefits for our employees. And in addition, the number that we are obligated to pass along to charters increases every year. And in addition, as we build more schools, thank goodness, to relieve overcrowding, that means additional expenses for additional principals, additional custodians. And given even all of that, our ask of the county is only 1.8?
It's actually a 5% increase
Oh, it's
on the
5%.
county. I think what you're thinking of is before we actually pulled out all of the COVID funding. But now on the next page, you can see the overall budget operating, not included capital and enterprise funds, but that change in the left-hand column, when you remove COVID funding that we had received last year and adopted, and all of the COVID funding this year, the change is really a 2.9% increase.
2.9%.
Overall for all funding sources.
Okay.
But it's really important too, when you're talking about the fixed cost and all the things, whether we were in COVID or not, we would still be having new initiatives and new programs and expand things that are successful as part of our ongoing and annual request of our county colleagues. We're just kind of piled on with, we have the regular type things, and then we have the things that we know are going to be really necessary this year because of the impact of COVID on everything from our custodial staff all the way to the top. So, like I said, I think it's just really crucial for us to separate those two asks to the public and make sure they really understand the difference.
Right.
No supplanting.
I agree. Okay. Well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and call for a vote. So we've got a motion on the table from Ms. De La Hara, a second from, who was the second from?
Was Dr. Jones. Dr. Jones.
From
It was
Dr.
Dr.
Jones.
Jones.
Oh, where is Dr. Jones?
She had to step out.
Oh. Should I wait for her to come back to call for the vote? I probably should.
Yeah.
Okay.
Madam Chair, in the meantime, while we wait for Dr. Jones, I was wondering if we have the county per pupil funding for last year, this year, and projected for next year. So all the conversation about splitting out the funds and yellow versus green money and all that sort of stuff, do we have the county per pupil funding figure for last year, this year, and what's forecasted for next year, given our forecasted enrollment changes?
So I would ask Ms. Shirley if she has that information. If we don't have that, I know Dr. Jones is back, we can certainly follow up and provide that information, Mr. Strain.
That's fine.
I think you can find that on the key statistics page on 89. I think there's a 10-year trend that you can refer to that will show that.
Yeah, Sheila, I apologize, I didn't bring that.
Okay, well,
Well,
I'll get it and give it, I'll send it to you.
So is that, are you okay if you get that?
I'm good.
Okay.
We'll get it later.
All right, well, Dr. Jones is back, so I'm going to go ahead and call for the vote. All those in favor of the motion, let it be known by a show of hands.
Yep.
Any opposed? All right, that motion passes by a vote of 8-1. Thank you very much. So now I'm going to turn back to the superintendent for a report, actually a bit of a workshop on a quarterly data review.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair and board members. I'm going to ask Dr. Frank Barnes, our Chief Equity Officer, to bring forward the quarterly data review. I know we had some conversations prior to the budget approval about the status of our students, and I think this will give you a glimpse of that. It won't give you the entire picture, but it will certainly give you a glimpse into that window. So with that, I'm going to turn to Dr. Barnes to begin his report.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent, Madam Chair, members of the board. Want to go through this relatively quickly to save the lion's share of our time for discussion and questions and your own observations. However, what I want to do in starting is to provide some context by looking at our strategic plan targets, and want to, in looking at these leading indicators, give you some early signs of the impact of the pandemic that we see thus far through 3 quarters. In this explanation and this examination, we'll look at data in the aggregate, meaning for all students, and for subgroups of students. And when we look at student absenteeism, we'll also look at concentrations of poverty at the school level. As we conclude my remarks, what I'll talk about is the frequency of reporting for the 21-22 school year, the one coming up, and some extra efforts we want to take to ensure that we're being transparent with you and with our community. And as I said, then we'll have time for questions, responses. So once again, I'll go at a healthy clip, and Mr. Superintendent, I'll trust that you'll give me the high sign if I'm going too fast or likewise too slowly. So you set out before, as we created Strategic Plan 2024, you set out some overarching broad goals, which gave us direction and specificity about what we were going after, to be able to prepare our students to be successful, to make sure they're having a rich instructional diet and getting access to the extra support to address their own wellness and emotional support. From that, we identified a set of targets, identified ways we'd measure them. And after 6 years, which would have been 2024 if all things had been uninterrupted, we wanted to make sure that 95% of our high school students graduated in 4 years with their cohort, that of those graduates, 75% would graduate and earn at least one state graduation endorsement. At least 75% of those students would complete at least one college-level course by the time they left us in graduation. That 60% of our 8th graders would complete Math 1, what some of us who are older might remember as algebra, by the end of 8th grade, and that we would cut the percent who are not proficient, cut the percent not proficient in half for each racial subgroup. And by doing so, cutting that gap in half, that we'd be cutting gaps, particularly the black-white CCR gap, in half. So that's what we wanted to achieve with this plan in 6 years. In looking at these measures, we set down annual milestones in the aggregate and subgroup for each of these major metrics. I wanted to give you some examples to illustrate with specificity what those milestones were. For grade 3 is a bit of an outlier from the other metrics around college and career readiness, around our end of grade, which I'll refer to as EOG, or end of course exams, which I'll refer to as EOCs. And in this case, under the former superintendent, what we articulated was that our community, led by Reed Charlotte and members of the philanthropic community, set a big, hairy, audacious goal that 80% of our 3rd graders be reading by the time we hit that, what would be our 6-year mark, 2024. We calibrated our goals to this, seeking to go farther and higher than even our own calculation would have put us. And what you see here, and it's illustrated by this line graph, is that you can see where the gaps were as we started between the subgroups. Those who were farthest from having 100% of students cognitive career ready at the beginning of our process would be gaining ground at a faster rate, but all groups would be projected to advance, and those gaps would be closing between those subgroups. Prior to the pandemic, this is where we stood. So in all of our metrics, the 2016-17 school year data was the baseline data. You can see where we came in 2018 as we were ramping up, and in 2019, which would have been year 1 of the strategic plan, you can see we increased incrementally in the aggregate, but did not meet our year 1 goals. This was pre-pandemic, and you can see there were some areas where we made progress for multiple subgroups, but we're not yet hitting all of the attended goals. Oops, sorry. Here is another example in grade 5 mathematics. Similarly, you can see over the 6-year trajectory of our strategic plan for both in the aggregate and for targeted subgroups, we had annual milestones. Where were we pre-pandemic? Please excuse me. Where we were pre-pandemic, we see that we were starting to make some advances, and then in the 2018-19 year, our scores plummeted. That was due in large part, in no small measure, to a change in the math assessments and the scale scores in mathematics across the state. This same type of decline, and in some instances greater amounts, were experienced by other districts and as the state overall. So even as we were beginning our path on strategic plan 2024 in mathematics, we were already challenged with the bar had shifted just as we were beginning. For another measure around our students' preparedness as they graduate, one measure was looking at state graduation endorsements. There's 5 different areas where a student could earn a graduation endorsement based on the courses that they completed, and in some instances, a minimum grade point average, or GPA. What you see here are the measures that we were trying to get for 75%, at least 75% of our students to graduate with at least 1 endorsement. Students can earn more than 1 endorsement by the time they conclude high school. You can see where we were in 2019 compared to where we wanted to be. We were above, but then as we took another step forward, In 2020, we actually went down for a number of our subgroups, increased in others, but in the aggregate did not yet meet our year 2 2020 targets in this particular area. In another area that we don't always talk about is percent of students graduating with or completing at least one college course. You can see here the aggregate annual milestones and the subgroup annual milestones. And when we look at these data through where we were pre-pandemic, you can see where we were in 2019, actually of meeting most of our milestones here. And then in 2020, although we took a step forward, we were just shy of meeting it in the aggregate. Those subgroups, some subgroups were able to meet or slightly surpass them. This is where we were pre-pandemic. So let's talk about the effects of the pandemic through the lens of our third quarter performance on several subgroups. So what I'm going to be sharing from this point on is looking at our third quarter performance. So first, just to do a quick review of something we discussed, I believe, Madam Chair, might have been 2 or 3 meetings ago, which is looking at exam taking and performance from what we had already from the fall. And to summarize in one slide, and then I'll advance to reserve our time, is what we saw in the data we presented to you before was that we've seen lower participation rates and lower performance, both for ourselves and in the state. The largest decline in performance thus far based on our fall end of course performance was in Math 1. We saw a 17.8 percentage point decline. And the smallest decline was in English 2, where we saw a 3.3 percentage point decline. In our previous discussions, we looked in the aggregate and across multiple subgroups, program and race and income, across all of the EOCs. Because of our time, I will just keep focused on the aggregate. This is the state's results, where you can see, if I ask you to take a look, or the listening audience, to our far left, the percent not proficient, and even to the point percent level 4 at level 5, you can see increases at the state level in the percent of students who are not proficient, and declines in the percent of students who were proficient, or meaning I should say level 4 or level 5 would be college ready, with the exception of English 2. And we see these same trends as we discussed prior for CMS, where we can see an increase in the percentage of students not proficient based on our fall end of course or EOC performance. Another metric that we've been examining alongside our fall EOC results is looking at our universal screener, which is the Northwest Evaluation Association's measure of academic progress. So the Northwest Evaluation Association is the vendor, and we work with them, and their assessment is the measure of academic progress, also known by its acronym, MAP. These MAP scores principally and primarily are used to identify students, to say crudely, who need extra help, but also to see that they're progressing at a pace along with their peers based on a national sample. What we saw in looking at these data, both after a fall administration and a winter administration, is that our kindergarten and first grade students were doing astronomically well, many of them being in the 90th percentile. At this point, most of these students were being tested remotely at home, and we assert or hypothesize that perhaps their high performance may have been because of some well-meaning adults giving a little extra support or guidance. However, even as we began to look at the results, even as we looked at other results outside of Can2, as we administered this exam 3 times a year, fall, winter, and spring, every year, even pre-pandemic, we were looking at our results for students in 2nd grade through 8th as we administered these assessments in K through 8th grade. So although I stated what the primary or principal use for these MAP scores are, they can also be used to give us a prediction, if you will, or a projection is better said, of what our performance might be on end of grade or end of course exams. And that's how we've looked at those. There is a certain probability that students will perform a certain level, and that number or probability changes test by test, grade by grade. But what we saw, even as we're looking at those early results, is after the winter assessment, we're seeing a projection of lower college and career ready rates in grades 3 through 8. So that's something that we need to pay attention to for the performance on this MAP assessment, are projecting that we'll perform on our EOGs, end of grade assessments, the way our students in the fall performed on our EOC rate, that our college credit rates will go down. So the effects of the pandemic on course performance. In the case of course performance, we shared these data with you after the second quarter, so we're coming back to you to say, how did these data look after the third quarter? So in preview, what I'll say is, in looking at quarter 3 performance, we are seeing that more students did receive an F letter grade in English language arts and mathematics than in 2019-20, last year. However, what we did see was that there was a decrease in the percentage of students receiving an F in English language arts and mathematics from quarter 2. So we saw improvement from quarter 2 to quarter 3, but our rates are still high compared to the last year and high in general. Something surprising, which you'll see in the data we'll talk about in just a moment, is that we did see that students in full remote academy did receive a lower percentage of Fs in English language arts and mathematics than their peers who received both a mix of in-person and remote instruction, which we call hybrid for this purposes. So when I use the term hybrid, I'm talking about students who had experienced instruction in 2 modalities, in-person and remote, as opposed to full remote academy, where students received instruction exclusively remotely, either synchronously or asynchronously. So that was something that was very interesting. But despite these changes from one year to the next or quarter to quarter, Black and Hispanic students, on average, were more likely to receive a failing grade in English language arts and mathematics than their white and Asian peers. So let's look at the data for quarter 3. What you see here is data for 3 different groups going from left to right. The first group are students who were with us in the third quarter in 2019-20, pre-pandemic. Then you see students who were with us in this past third quarter. In the middle, what you see are students who received this mix of in-person and remote, or we say hybrid. And then on the far right are students who are in the full remote academy. What you see are various subgroups for which we have data to be able to look at. What you can see is clearly that we have an increase in our failure rates in English language arts and mathematics this year. But what you see, whether it be for the overall student body or for subgroups, a marked difference in the percentage of students who are receiving an F in English language arts and mathematics. Bless you. Bless you. I can only hypothesize why this is, but I can't say with any clarity or precision, bless you, why this occurred. So we have to look into this phenomena a little bit more. But as we look at these data, it's important that we look and see, did we make progress from one quarter to the next quarter? I want to commend our principals, our learning community superintendents, our equity superintendents, and under the leadership of both the superintendent and my colleague, Dr. Matt Hayes, our principals work to support our families, to support our students, to try to mitigate against the impact of that. One of the things we begin to do is to think about how do we make decisions on behalf of students, and we change part of how we grade it. But also we try to change what kind of instructional supports and what kind of instructional experience students would have. The impact of that was this, that here we're looking at 2 groups of students who are with us for the third quarter, those who are receiving that hybrid instruction and those in full remote academy. And what you can see is there was a reduction across the board from second quarter to third quarter, which is encouraging. I would say these figures are still too high. We don't have a reason to say mission accomplished, but we can acknowledge that when we look at data in a pointed way, respond swiftly with just-in-time supports, and make changes, that we can see impacts during the school year and not wait till the end of the year and say, how did we do, and only look at what some people would call autopsy data. The impact of the pandemic on student absenteeism. Another metric we shared with this body after the second quarter. Let's look at how these data looked after the third quarter. So specifically, we looked at chronic absenteeism, which we define and the state defines and the industry defines as students missing at least 10% of their days in membership. What we saw after the third quarter is that chronic absenteeism is up from last year. It's still up from last year this year. However, we did see chronic absenteeism hold steady across all subgroups from quarter 2, which in and of itself is a success, as when we look at these numbers longitudinally, chronic absenteeism for the district usually increases throughout the school year. So for them to hold steady, that shows that there was some impact of our interventions, which is encouraging. Just as with course performance, surprisingly so, for me personally, is these students that across all the subgroups who were in Fluid Remote Academy had marketed better absenteeism rates than those who were receiving hybrid instruction. Now, I'll look at this more closely in just a moment. And what we'll be able to look at the difference in absenteeism, particularly chronic absenteeism, for students in low poverty schools compared to their peers in moderate or high poverty schools. And this is particularly alarming and helps to point to the impacts of the pandemic more clearly for some parts of our community. So once again, you have these three groups of students going from left to right, those who were with us last year and the two groups who are with us this year. What you see is that we do see a rise in chronic absenteeism for those who were in person, having the hybrid, the mix of in-person and remote. But what was truly surprising to me was to look at, if I ask you to look at these figures here for students in Fluid Remote Academy. And what you see for several subgroups is that the chronic absenteeism actually was lower in some cases than it was when we were in conventional instruction. Meaning that those students in Fluid Remote Academy, on average for these subgroups, actually at chronic absence were more present remotely than they were physically the year before. Not those same exact students, but you're talking about groups of students who had the same subgroup. That was fascinating and not what I expected to see in these data. As we look from one quarter to the next for the students receiving hybrid instruction and students for Fluid Remote Academy, here's what we mean by it held steady. Once again, historically, longitudinally, these numbers will increase throughout the school year. Some of that's a mathematical element, but also some of it's students who, as the school year goes on, decide not to attend as engagingly. Here you see that we were able to hold those numbers relatively steady across both groups for all subgroups, meaning hybrid group, Fluid Remote Academy, and then for various subgroups. Again, I want to acknowledge the work of our principals, our teachers, our counseling team, and all of the individuals who supported them to be able to support our families. It's their success. Now, here is something, when we talk about the impact of the pandemic, I want you to think about concentration of poverty in our school district. What we were able to do is to look at schools that are low poverty, which are in the dark blue, schools that are moderate poverty in the I'll call it CMS blue, and then schools that are high poverty in green. What you can see is that, and this is over a 3-year period, 18-19, 19-20, and this year, and this is through the 3 quarters, so this is a relatively apples to apples comparison. What you can see here is that chronic absenteeism increased, but when you look across at low poverty schools, absenteeism during the pandemic actually decreased. But for moderate and high poverty schools, you saw an increase for moderate poverty, but for high poverty schools, it increased astronomically. This is part of the impact, the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on our community based on the resources that our community has distributed. We also wanted to look at this by grade span as we looked at this. So when you look at the elementary level, you can see over 18-19 and 19-20 that the absenteeism level, for chronic absenteeism level, was tightly aligned over those last 2 years. Once the pandemic hit, for low poverty schools, chronic absenteeism almost cut in half, a little bit more than half. Moderate poverty, it rose slightly, but for high poverty schools, it doubled. This is part of what we're talking about in our community. When you look at middle schools, you can see a slight decrease for low poverty schools in chronic absenteeism. You can see a marked double-figure increase for moderate poverty schools. And you can see us going over 50% of our students in the middle grades were chronically absent at high poverty schools, high poverty middle schools. Once again, the impact of the pandemic. When we look at K-8 schools, you can actually see where in moderate poverty and low poverty schools, they begin to converge in their rates of chronic absenteeism. But then during the pandemic, they went different directions, one cutting it in half, one going up 10 percentage points. And you can see that in 18-19 for high poverty schools, the K schools, the chronic absenteeism rate was still very high, 22%. But it went from 22 to then this year, nearly 49%, more than double. This is the impact we're talking about that we've been trying to mitigate. And at high schools, you see this is an exception to the other grade spans, where you can still see there was a slight decline at low poverty schools, but you didn't see the same rate of increase. Although there is an increase across moderate and high poverty schools, it's not at the same level that you saw at the other grade spans. But it's still, for high poverty high schools, you're talking nearly 50%. So we have work to do, whether it be out of the pandemic or still in it. The effects of the pandemic on out-of-school and in-school suspensions. One question or concern we had was, given the students weren't in school, would students be excluded in some type of way through different types of behaviors? What we saw is through 3 quarters, we have nearly no out-of-school or in-school suspensions. We have not, through 3 quarters, we have 99 out-of-school suspensions and 35 in-school suspensions. I want you to compare those numbers to last year at this time. We had over 14,000 out-of-school suspensions, and we had over 12,000 in-school suspensions. So we see that during this COVID time, we weren't excluding students through this type of measure, and that's encouraging, but we want to let the data affirm what we thought would be the case. Oops. So transparency moving forward, and then I'll get out of the way and be able to answer any questions you have, and certainly facilitate and hear the conversation that you all have. First thing we're going to do is we're going to continue to monitor metrics. So over the 19-20 school year, we did not update our district dashboard. This is a picture of our CMS performance dashboard that is currently on our CMS website. We'll be updating that in the fall, so any data metrics that we do have from 2020, though we don't have a number of them, those we do, we'll update it, and we'll also update it for the 2021 school year. So these metrics will still be there. People can mine them by subgroup, by various different comparisons, and many of our different metrics for each school in the district overall. As a complement to this, we're going to build a complementary dashboard. We're going to be able to create a strategic plan scorecard. So you, as members of the board, but also our public, can be able to monitor across those big metrics that we had and see how we're doing, what the status of those metrics are. Look at them the prior year versus the prior actual to be able to keep score. Are we making the progress we are? But also see what the milestones are moving forward and to be able to show trend lines over time. Also, we're going to come back to you in this same type of fashion, receiving your feedback, of course, of how we can make this the most fruitful, but look at a set of leading indicators coming to you 3 times a year after the fall quarter, second quarter, third quarter, to be able to give you updates on some of these same metrics we presented here and any refined of others one that we can bring to you to review. So we want you to be able to see where we stand at any given point, how we're doing against the targets that we set, are we making the necessary progress over time, and also give you in-game views after each quarter. So that's the commitment we make to you. It's a commitment we make to our community to be able to create this kind of transparency. And once again, we'll provide these data through in the aggregate and by subgroup to be able to show that to our community. And with that, I want to be able to answer or respond to any of your questions, as well as, Madam Chair, be able to allow the board to have their own conversation. I'm joined by my colleagues. Dr. Hayes can also answer any questions you might have that I'm not able to. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. I see Dr. Jones.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for this report. I also want to thank the citizens' commitment and assistance to help our remote students, especially the support via churches, houses of faith. At least half dozen churches have contacted me over the year about the work that they wanted to do and set about doing. And I had a list of such churches and I misplaced it, but I'm most familiar with Mount Carmel Baptist Church and Greer Heights Presbyterian Church. They have just been phenomenal in the support that they've given students, and that, I think, attributes to some of the surprises you say you may have had. And I hope to see this kind of commitment continue post pandemic, because it's made all the difference for these students. Thank you.
Ms. Sawyer.
Thank you, Carol Sawyer. I have a question about the chronic absenteeism data. Do we know, in the first quarter, which seems like years ago somehow, a very long time ago in the fall, when we were still provisioning families with hotspots and technology, it took some time to get that into people's hands. Is the chronic absenteeism like loaded in that first quarter? That, student was, built up enough absent days because they didn't have technology during the first few weeks of school that then their attendance improved? Or is the chronic absenteeism like evenly, is the absenteeism distributed throughout the year?
I would say it varies by the student.
Mm-hmm.
In some instances, it does improve. And in some instances, we see improved attendance for students, and they're still chronically absent. Let me explain for the listening public, not for you, but for the listening public, that given at the time that the third quarter ended, we were at about 130 instructional days if that student came on the first day. Meaning if a student missed a minimum of 13 instructional days, they would be chronically absent. We have some students who, after the end of the first quarter, they had already missed 13 days. And so it would take time for them to accrue enough instructional days, if you will, to be able to not be chronically absent. Or the other side of that is they could continue to be present, have an average daily attendance that was higher, but because they had so many front-loaded absences, they're still chronically absent. And so those are two distinguishing things that we learned through this experience. We need to be thinking about average daily attendance and chronic absenteeism. So I think it really varies from school to school and student to student, whether there were some folks who had it front-loaded or that just mitigating circumstances, students weren't engaged in the middle. One of the things we recognized when we talked about how low the floor was for missing assignments was when students get zeros, it's hard to recover from a zero, whether you missed the assignment or did poorly on it. But when you raise it to a 50, we're not trying to reward negligence. We're not trying to reward mediocrity. What we're trying to say is you can get out of a set of bad decisions or circumstances. I think one thing that Dr. Hayes pointed to often is what we sometimes do in educational systems is we adults in the system interrogate and blame students for their failure. What we're trying to do in this pandemic, and we'll commit to do moving forward, is examine the system that the students are in and interrogate it for their failure.
Yeah, that helps, because going back to the absenteeism thing, I'm wondering, it's interesting that it's higher, in high poverty elementary schools, it's really high, and I'm just sort of wondering how much of that is that chronic absenteeism happened in the first 3 weeks that sort of carried forward, and once they got technology, they picked up or not. But I appreciate the grading scale explanation. I'm sort of convinced that anybody who's wedded to giving kids zeros needs to make an A a 4 or a 40. If we're wedded to a zero, lower the top, because there's no point in having that huge hole disproportionate to all the other grade spans if we keep the traditional 100 to 0.
But forgive me for my sidebar, but we need to do a deeper analysis to look at where the concentration of absences were across these three different concentrations of poverty to see what led to that. As we do a backwards look at the full impact of the pandemic, we can be able to have that answer for you.
Thank you.
Ms. Shipp.
Yes, thank you for this work, and this is really important for us to be able to see this in the breakdown of our students in terms of student chronic absenteeism, and then how they're performing as well. I think it's in a question about student absenteeism, there were students who were maybe assigned, when we talk about that hybrid model, were assigned to come to class, but did not come and went but they did come to school, but in the remote model, and were counted absent in the beginning. So I think, was that also a concern as well? Because we had students in schools, I think the administration, everybody was trying to figure out how to do that, because they were supposed to come to school, they didn't come in that group, but they did show up and sign in as remote, and I know in many cases they were counted absent. Is that?
Thank you, Ms. Shipp, I understand. We don't have enough insight at this moment to see how many cases where there were a student was actually engaged but remote when they were assigned to be in person. We don't have enough insight to our data. We'll try to look in our data to see where that is, but I'm going to presume there were instances where we had students who said, okay, I'm just going to engage remotely, before we kind of got in how do we take attendance, and we marked them absent, and that would have been the appropriate and legal thing to do if we were expecting them to be in person before that action was corrected.
Right. And I think that was really happened quite a bit at the elementary level. So you may have seen that happen there, because I know there were teachers in schools talking about that issue. And then I think when you talk about at some of the high poverty schools, I think a lot of the questions also were students not signing in to come on. They're there but not signing in, and so of course they're counted absent. And then when you start talking about grades are based on the fact that students just didn't show up for class, not even looking at performance. So I think that there were a lot of challenges here when you talk about how we grade students. Because if they don't show up, and it's the grades based on the fact that they had, or their grades based on missing work because they didn't come, or really performance. So we got two things in grading, which has really been a determinant for how did you receive a D or F, what was being considered. So I think you're right, it was a system failure more so than just the students, because we really have to look at what were we grading, how were we grading, what were the expectations during this pandemic of how we grade children, students. And that 50% had started before COVID. Many schools had already looked at that, so just wanted to share that too, because we're always trying to look at ways to make sure that students have chances, retesting students, giving children opportunities to retest. That had occurred before COVID, and I think these were just things we were trying to put more in fine-tune in place. And I think so, again, the system questions about how we grade, how we perform, what we expect in terms of performance for children.
Yes, ma'am, and I don't think it can be said enough just how hard school-based staff work to identify students and to pursue them, do home visits, do phone calling, do everything they could to engage students who were unengaged, who were part of our enrollment but just weren't there. That work was led by principals, by teachers, by counselors, by social workers. We just can't say enough about how hard our staff worked to engage families.
And I was aware that one particular school, and I'm going to shout out to that school, Southwest Middle School, a counselor told me they had made over 100 home visits in the first semester of school, as you mentioned, because of that very thing. And I'll give a shout out to them because I know they did that work. And so there's a lot of schools that did a lot of work to try to support their students. Thank you. And I want to say to Mount Carmel, I'm familiar with Mount Carmel too, dittoing what Dr. Jones said. There were several faith-based churches also helping out to ensure that students in remote were getting support. So I want to say that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? Well, could you speak about a little bit more about what changed in our approach when we realized the number of students that were failing, and we responded, and we were able to change that number? And I know we've all talked about the grading policy and how at a 0, that was insurmountable, and at a 50, it was worth engaging, worth trying, because it was surmountable to come back. But there were other things that schools did too. Can you talk about those other tactics?
Yes, ma'am, I can. So what we saw was a particularly large spike in the middle grades. And what we acknowledged was there were some challenges where some of our middle grade students were having to take on a level of, say, self-management and academic independence that we hadn't necessarily built some of the scaffolds for them. And so there were some things done across all grades, but I want to talk about the middle grades because we were seeing that particularly happen. And what some things we did was we wanted to create a universal experience across our different courses in Canvas. I was going to say campus courses, but our courses that were in Canvas. So there'd be a common place where you could go to look for assignments, look for important due dates, know where things, as a parent or as a student, where could you go to make sure you knew what was due and when it was due, point it straight forward. Then also part of what we did is we started to create more time, whether it was during asynchronous time or during time after school, if you could say, where people could get extra help and be able to have, teachers could have, if you will, office hours, if you will. That's my college equivalent, office hours, where they could come and get extra help if they needed to. I think also it was just the fact that teachers reaching out to families to say, hey, I'm noticing this in your performance, what's going on? I think there was that hand holding in that way to be able to build a bridge, not to make it feel like I did my part, why aren't you? To recognize we're in this together. So between the consistency of experience, no matter what grade you are, what school you're in, the opportunities for extra help, to pull students into that help, but also to create the space that they had it, so they was like the train is leaving and I never get a chance to get extra help. And also the bridging between school and family to be able to say we're in this together. It's not me versus you, where I did my work, you want you do yours, to kind of build those bridges. Those are 3 examples of buckets of things that schools did. And there were other things that they adapted and adopted at the classroom level or school level that I think centrally we're still trying to learn more about.
Thank you. Ms. Marshall?
I just want to follow up a little bit on that. You know, I think it's interesting as we have looked at these statistics for our middle school students, their jump in absenteeism, their jump in poor performance. You've really spoken to that. And I think as a community, I would really challenge our community to really love on our middle schoolers more than we ever have. And I think this is one of those things, this is as the data is coming in and we're sort of assessing where we are to strategically look at how we want to spend our money going forward. That ability to get extra time and help and that ability for extra tutoring to happen, particularly in middle school, where we typically don't have those small groups like we do in elementary school, that in terms of scheduling for next year and how we allocate staff, I think is really going to be important. I feel like I speak to high school parents in many cases who say, my high school kids pretty much got it figured out. This has not been easy, but they have figured many things out about how to work successfully, and we definitely have a lot to make up there too. But for that middle school population, I think they need some special attention. And so I would really hope that going forward, we would really look at that as a very targeted group for us as a district. Thank you for pulling all of these out.
Thank you. And I also want to acknowledge one of your colleagues who gave some timely feedback and said, perhaps very gently and kindly, perhaps you want to look at any differences between full remote academy and hybrid experiences. So I want to acknowledge Ms. De La Hara for her encouragement and suggestion. I know sometimes we can be stubborn as staff. Okay, I can be stubborn. I won't put that on my colleagues. So to be able to get guidance and suggestions that creates greater transparency is very helpful.
Ms. Fowler? Oh, go ahead. You go, Dr. Barnes.
Please, Ms. Fowler, I'm sorry.
Okay, Ms. Fowler.
This is Brianna Fowler speaking, and I know that we have emphasized a great deal of how our middle school students have just jumped from being really engaged to the absenteeism. I think that the grading policy, the new grading policy, like you said, has really had a positive impact. I don't have a middle schooler, that's not my son. I have a brother that is a middle schooler, and I've really seen the difference with the new grading policy. Without the grading policy, he would say, oh, I got a 0, like, I don't want to do it anymore, I don't want to try, I just know I'm going to fail anyways. So with the 50%, he's more encouraged to try and to actually try with the assignments and learn. And I've seen that with high schoolers through the surveys, and I don't really talk to elementary schoolers. I focus on middle school and high school, I'm not gonna lie. But with that being said, I've asked this multiple times, but I know that we're busy. And if Dr. Matt Hayes could follow up about the grading policy being implemented into the first semester. I know that a lot of things are happening in CMS, so for us to make it equitable and put the grading policy in the first semester, just to see if that's possible, I would like to hear more about that.
Sure, Ms. Fowler. Right now, these grades were all going forward. They weren't done retroactive, but what we do have is a group led by my colleague Avery Mitchell to look at our grading plan post-pandemic. What we found is some things that we did during the pandemic that these conditions made us look at, we're now looking at in a very research-based, student-centered way to think about how can we move forward. And so I think your advocacy and the work that these conditions created help us think about how do we do things differently post-pandemic moving forward for kids, for young people, excuse me.
Okay, thank you.
I see Ms. Cheek and then Mr. Strain.
Thank you for this information. I think my two biggest questions, Ms. Marshall, pointing out that middle schoolers seem to be a huge issue is such a great concern to me. Even before the pandemic, middle school's where we kind of make or break it. If we can capture them and we can get them engaged in middle school, we carry that energy and that enthusiasm through high school. If we lose them in middle school, that's where the children that do not graduate start. And I've been a long advocate for AVID and different programs to even the CTE, driving our CTE programs down into the middle school years so that students in middle school can see a path forward past high school and get them engaged. So that's something I think that this data about middle schoolers gives me a lot of concern about where we are with graduation rates about 6 years from now. So I think that we have to really be on that, like on it. The other thing is just out of curiosity, you are so busy digging into our own data, but are you seeing similar trends across the state and region, locally, in our immediate area, but across the state with this kind of absenteeism issues and with the grade issues, the academic challenges, I guess? Are we seeing this pretty consistently?
Yes, ma'am, particularly across our large urbans where we're able to share either data or anecdotes from what we're seeing in our own analyses. We're seeing grades are down, absenteeism is up, and the fall end of course grade performance is down across the state and particularly in large districts. We also have the benefit of working as part of the Council of Great City Schools which are part of a consortium of 67 largest urban school districts in the country. And these are national trends. I understand that we don't live across the country. We live here in Mecklenburg County, which think about our kids. But what we're experiencing, the challenges we're seeing are a national challenge. And we need to figure it out locally, but we're not alone in experiencing this.
That's kind of my point is, yes, they are our kids, and it doesn't matter that everybody else is drowning. We want to save ours. And we want to learn from what other people are doing, though, and keep open to what other districts are doing with interventions. I think one of the other big things I would be curious, and this is probably a data point that's harder to get, is are the other districts especially the large urbans in North Carolina or the districts around us, the ones that are having similar challenges, have they been back to school longer than we have? Are we seeing the same thing in schools that went back hybrid way before us, that it was really just a combination of not being in person all the way? I'm just kind of curious about that because I wonder how much being completely remote, being hybrid, and then going back to full in-person, where those trends fell and who maybe, I know there's some small districts that went back full-time really early. And I know that data wouldn't translate real well with us, but I just kind of wonder where school districts would fall. And that's just a curiosity I have. But I certainly don't want you to take your time, but like Union County went back much before us. Some of the districts down in the eastern part of the state, Carteret County, went back full-time in the fall. I just wonder where are they with their numbers, just to get an idea. And it really does nothing but inform us of what things work the best. Because I don't think, I think there's a difference between being full remote and being hybrid. But I don't know that it's going to be an astronomical difference.
Yes, ma'am, I think that's a good question. We'll need to look at that once those data become public. What we can make sure we do, especially working with Mr. Jeter, is identify districts that went back at different times. Then when those data become available to the public, that can be in kind of our final analysis.
I think that would be good. It's kind of a root cause analysis, sort of looking back at that data. So just to have it for the future. But let's just really make sure, Mr. Winston, that we are so mindful of this information about our middle school students, because they are our future high school students, and we want to recapture them. I want to recapture every student that's slipped away over this last year, but we've got to recapture those middle school students, or we leave them with no future.
Duly noted. Thank you.
Okay, I see Mr. Strain, and then I'll come back to you, Dr. Jones.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the report. Dr. Barnes, I'm mindful that most of this is Q3, all of it's Q3 data, and I think that Q3 ran from 5 January to 11 March. Is that right?
I'm sorry, I'm just pulling out my calendar.
Sure. I'm trying to do the same, and we've got so many calendars this year.
Yes, so the third quarter did conclude on Thursday, March 11th, and did begin as we came back from the holidays.
On the 5th of January, right?
Yeah, and began remotely, yes, sir.
Yeah. So when we've pulled out in the third quarter hybrid versus full remote, how many in-person days are we actually talking about, the differential between those two?
I can't recall the specific number of days. That's an easy thing to get for you. I don't have it off the top of my head. But I think the point that you're making, Mr. Strain, which is astute, is that we're not talking about all 40 of those days, all 47 of those days in the third quarter were in person. That I'm going to ask some of my colleagues who are in the wings, they can text me what that number is as we're putting that together.
Yeah, I think it's not only the minority, I think it's a small minority, right? So students who were full remote versus students who were hybrid, we're talking about potentially a couple of days differential between those. And so I guess my question would be, what else is there that can explain that differential between hybrid and full remote? Because it's not the number of days in-person learning, because we're talking about literally a couple of the 47 that our students would have been in-person learning, even if they selected it.
That's a really good question. I don't know exactly, because even if we look at the Full Remote Academy was approximately 70% African American and Latino and Latina. It was disproportionate in that way. And what we see is it wasn't just students at, say, low poverty schools that were choosing Full Remote Academy. You had a larger proportion of students in high poverty schools who, for various personal reasons and public health concerns, said, I want to keep my child at home, even if you open the doors. I have certain hypotheses, but I would only be guessing. But it was something I did not expect to see in the data. I don't know enough about what kind of scaffolds and supports were there. Dr. Jones raised the issue of partners being able to create what we'll call community-based hubs, if you will, to support families. You could talk about families being able to support their children better when they're right there in front of them, potentially. There's a whole host of hypotheses why, but I don't think it's because students who had stronger pre-pandemic performance were in Full Remote Academy. I think there's something else that I haven't been able to put my finger on. I certainly can talk to our research team, as I have people who are better and brighter and look at this more deeply than myself.
Right. I guess the point is as you slice and dice data, sometimes you take a swing at it. There's some data that may surprise you a bit, but you can't explain it. And sometimes it's because you've taken a slice that says, okay, people who are born on odd days have a better batting average than people that are born on even days. That might be a true statement, but it's absolutely immaterial, right? I guess my point is, given the differential in the number of days of in-person learning, I can't, which is almost inconsequential in the third quarter, because we went back late after the surge in January and early February. And so from that perspective, I'm looking at those numbers, and I don't see anything material that would have done that. So I'm interested in any further thoughts you may develop in terms of whether there's a material difference that was actually contributing to that. Because even our hybrid folks, I mean, they were remote as well, right? Because we were in Plan C for most of this period. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any more, Dr. Jones?
Yes, I would just like to make a comment about middle school.
I'd just like to make a comment about middle schools. Mr. Strain is the data king, but I'm the experience queen. And I spent more than a decade in middle schools at various levels. It is the hardest age group to teach.
It is.
And parent. So that's something I just wanted to put out there in the atmosphere for us to look at. So, and it has implications for what we are talking about right now. That's why I'm making that statement. Thank you.
Thank you.
They need a lot of structure. I was just going to say, in talking about middle school, I was a middle school teacher for a while. They need structure, and I think that's one of the things that happen for middle school that affects them even more so than the elementary and high, if you want to say, too, is that they're used to structure. And for middle school students to perform and perform well, they need routine, they need structure, they need things to stay going. And all the changes that were made for them or during the time that they're in, it's going to be harder for that group than even your elementary and your high. They're in the middle. So I think that's what you saw too. Middle school is that group. If no other group, they need that tight structure. They need to know exactly what the expectations are. And I think that was a group we did not catch in that way. And that would have had a lot of bearing on their performance.
Well, Dr. Barnes, I just want to thank you for this quarterly progress update. And I think this goes to show that when you are monitoring to data, you can catch things and respond just in time and have a real impact on student outcomes, which is something that we as a board need to do more of. And we'll be exploring more, discussing more, learning more about at our upcoming retreat this Friday and Saturday. So more to come on this and more to come of this kind of work. Thank you very much. This is what we need to be doing if we're going to make a difference for our kids who need us to make a difference for them.
Thank you very much.
So if there are no further comments, I will go ahead and entertain a motion to adjourn. A motion from Ms. Byers-Bailey, second from Ms. Sawyer. All those in favor of the motion, please let it be known by a show of hands. Any opposed? All right, thank you, Madam Clerk. We're adjourned.